What are your goals for your team and company? To be more agile and resilient? To innovate more quickly? To attract and retain top talent? That kind of growth begins with culture. A culture that breeds longevity, a cloud-ready culture. AWS is helping companies revolutionize their businesses by achieving their business goals, creating new revenue streams, improving operational efficiency, and reducing business risks. Companies like Nubank, PagerDuty, and Expedia Group. Leading a move to the cloud and achieving business value requires more than just technology shifts. Companies on the path to cloud success have to evolve their culture while also investing in their strategy, people, process, and technology as a foundation for long-term success. Nubank, for example, is the largest independent digital bank in the world, powered by a culture with technology at the core. With their accelerated growth largely driven by their commitment to increasing efficiency and innovation, they are freeing people from complexity in financial services. When it comes to revolutionizing business operations, PagerDuty delivers. Recognized as a global technology leader, their powerful and unique platform, along with over 650 integrations, make sure their customers can take the right action when seconds matter. PagerDuty is built on a people-first culture, where employees get the opportunity to empower teams with the time and efficiency to build the future by anticipating the unexpected in an unpredictable world. And in the hospitality industry, Expedia Group is one of the world's largest travel platforms with unrivaled knowledge of the industry and advanced tech innovation. Powered by more than 70-plus terabytes of data and over 20 years of tech innovation, Expedia Group brands transform the way customers travel with the widest selection, flexibility, and ease right at their fingertips. Bringing together travelers and technologists, Expedia Group finds the right pathways for building products and tech solutions that connect the dots and remove barriers to power more travel for everyone, everywhere. These companies understand that establishing culture doesn't just happen. Leaders that focus on cultivating a cloud-ready culture enable their organizations to reach their full potential and generate a sustainable business advantage. The future of tech is AWS.
Please welcome Vice President, Technology and Customer Solutions, AWS, Francesca Vasquez.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to reInvent 2022. Thank you all for being here for one of our encore leadership sessions. We are celebrating 11 years of reInvent, and I'm excited about this next session. When I speak to customers and ask them why they choose AWS, I get a lot of different responses because customers run a lot of different workloads. And yet, still beyond the primary benefits such as cost, agility, elasticity, there is one particular benefit that customers often mention, and that's the pace of innovation. Customers have long engaged AWS on their business transformation and on how to operate in the cloud. They've engaged us on cloud migrations, security, governance, but more and more CEOs and technology thought leaders are seeking to be more innovative. The most successful organizations of today, those that are entering new markets, they're acquiring new customers, what is actually setting them apart is their relentless focus on people and the customer. The ability of an enterprise to innovate isn't just about technology adoption. It's actually about people. And being an innovator, it requires a level of pioneering and overcoming challenges in 4 key areas: culture, organization, skills, and risk. So the question that I ask back to many of the customers and companies that I speak with truly wanting to transform and innovate more quickly, what is the culture that you want to have that cloud can actually enable for you? And how long does it take for the innovation and ideas that you generate to actually make it back to your customers? Here with me today, I'm incredibly excited, and I'm pleased to be joined by three amazing business leaders who have pioneered various aspects of their culture, their workforce, and their organization to truly innovate across the industry. I'd like for everyone to please give a warm welcome to Sean Scott, who's the Chief Product and Development Officer for PagerDuty, Candace Tang, who's the Vice President Developer Experience for Platform at the Expedia Group, and Justin Getland, who's the Vice President of Engineering at Nubank. Awesome. All right, let's do this. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Francesca.
Welcome to reInvent. It's great to see all of you.
Stoked to be here.
We're going to talk a little bit about culture. This year's reInvent, we have over 50,000 people here at the conference, more than 100,000 that are out on the live stream today. And I recently heard this quote, and many of you have probably heard this quote also in the industry. But the quote is, "Culture eats strategy." And so all of you are at three amazing companies, and I'd like to hear from you. How do you think about culture eating strategy from your perspective in your companies? And I think, Candace, I'll start with you and get your perspective from the Expedia side.
Well, thanks again for having me, Francesca. Super excited to be here. I am brand new in my role at Expedia. I'm about 2 months in now, and I'm still, of course, getting very immersed in the culture and understanding, some of the background and the history. But I think my take on what you just said, that quote you just made, is it's 100% true. I think at the core of everything we're trying to do around digital transformation, around really changing effectively the way we're working, sits culture and the way we treat our people and the way we operate. So yeah, I'm a true believer in that. I think, the role I had prior to Expedia, I was at Nike and I was leading the resilience and the reliability organization there. And I think, for us, we had a lot of mindset and behavior changes that, we really tried to drive through resilience. And that was something we partnered with AWS on quite frequently. And so, yeah, I think the culture is really at the core of everything we do.
Excellent. Justin, any perspective from you?
Sure. I think from the perspective of a company that is, growing rapidly and attacking our customer needs in a lot of different ways, we need our teams to be able to sort of operate independently. Mm-hmm. They need to be able to make decisions quickly and react to what the customer is telling us quickly. And we need a really strong culture that drives some of the decision making, right? So you can trust that the teams around you are doing, attacking the work in the same way. And really rely on the rest of the team so you can sort of lower some of the complications of alignment and consensus building and just keeping everybody on the same page, because everybody is starting from that same platform. And that's really important for us because we're constantly facing new challenges and we need to trust each other to go after them.
Great. Sean?
Yeah, and I think the culture really helps make your strategy and your execution easier. Mm-hmm. So we one of our leadership principles is champion the customer. Mm-hmm. And so getting everybody aligned to execute on that just makes everything we do from around the execution easier. So the hard part is make sure everybody is really aware and understands it. And if you look back at the last couple of years when there's been lots of attrition and lots of hiring, and I think like half of our company is literally new in the last 2 years. And so you have people that are remote, they're not in offices. And so how do you really instill that culture over Zoom? And it's a big challenge. And so you have lots of repetition, lots of talking about your values and kind of what you're about and why you're about it, giving the context about why it's so important. We deal with a lot of the top companies of the world with our product. And so they rely on us to keep them up. And because when everything else is going south, we need to be up to make sure that they're able to get their systems back up. And so championing the customer is really paramount for that, because if people are very disconnected from that value and not thinking about the value, then they're just doing their job, as opposed to, well, what is this going to mean, when you're notifying someone in the middle of the night and they got to wake up and try to figure out what's going on with their website, or maybe it's checkout or whatever it may be. Thinking about the customer is super important. So by having the culture, just making it part of everything you do, even interviewing for those aspects, to make sure people are not just kind of doing their job, but really ready to take this and make it part of who they are and who we are as a company.
Right. I want to shift gears. reInvent is a huge learning conference for a variety of different personas. Expedia has been one of the largest online travel platforms in the world. There's been over 20 years of tech innovation. You just mentioned you recently transitioned from Nike, where you were running an SRE team, and you're now running a developer experience organization. Can you talk about the role that developers play in shaping culture as companies are trying to move to the cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. And I think, for me, as I looked and evaluated taking on this new role, I really thought about, the through line between reliability and resilience over to the developer experience. Because within reliability and resilience, we often had the customer at the center of the way we thought about everything. We wanted to make sure that experience was best in class, and that experience was very fault tolerant. And I think the through line over the developer experience is really that is a key persona in building out these strategic initiatives across all of the digital transformations that's happening in every organization right now. And so I think the opportunity with the developer experience platforms that my team is building out is that we're always looking at that end-to-end developer journey, and we're looking for opportunities to remove toil from that system, remove some of the friction and the complexity around managing things like infrastructure and managing some of the general, tasks that have to go along with the work that they do, and getting, those developers back and focused on what's most important to them, and that's really building great features and building great products. So I think, the greater purpose for me as I, step into this role is really thinking about, the livelihood of those, key, team members, those developers, and how we can make sure that that journey for them is very frictionless.
Right. One thing before we move on, I just want to clarify. I mentioned 4, key areas, culture being one, but organization's pretty important too. You've run these SRE teams. How have you had to change how the organization thinks about just support in general in the cloud? I get this question a lot from customers.
It's a great question. I think when I started 10 years ago, I started in a very traditional production support role. So it was a very much a we build it, you run it sort of mentality, where dev was on one side and operations was on the other side, and we were running in a monolith architecture, similar story across many organizations. And I think the opportunity we had as we started migrating to the cloud and thinking about what DevOps meant to us was to really reimagine support. And I think one of the things I've learned about myself over time is I always look at problems as opportunities and setbacks as opportunities. And so I really thought that we could be a different team. We can be enablers, right? We don't have to be the team that's always sitting at the end of the line, just waiting for the house that's on fire and firefighting all the time. And so when we looked out at the industry and we looked at companies that were doing this, had been through this journey and were doing things really well, I think site reliability engineering really resonated with us, some of the principles and the practices around that. But that was a journey in and of itself, because there was still this perception of we were this outside party kind of trying to infiltrate and trying to, really tell people how to run their code, which was absolutely not what we were trying to do. And so for us, the 2 things I think that really worked well was thinking about it from a shared ownership perspective. So really bringing the business together, bringing the engineering teams together, and aligning our metrics and our goalposts around business value, right? So thinking about it from the customer perspective of uptime and what we want it to be highly available, and then working our metrics back based at the service level, our SLIs, our SLOs, based on those business metrics. And once we got aligned on those goals and had a common language that we could use around what we were trying to achieve, that process became much easier. I think the other thing that we did that was really important was we actually embedded a lot of SREs within the key teams, and we had them work with the teams and kind of show them what site reliability practices worked, and really focus on kind of training the trainer, right? So sitting them alongside those engineers and teaching them how to do their own observability, teaching them how to have their on-call schedules set up, and knowledge articles put into place. And so I think that really helped to enable the teams and make them feel more confident as they were taking pagers and as they were going on call. right? And then we were able to exit. And really, when I left, I think the team was in a really great place. We'd scaled the team from probably about 50, at the time when I started, level 3 production support engineers to a team of 200. And we were very much focused on really moving that resilience further upstream in the SALC. So thinking about resilience as a mindset and as a part of design versus an afterthought.
Love that. I want to come to you, Justin, because a lot of companies right now, they're at different stages of adoption. And they're also multinational and global. And you're with Nubank. You're the Vice President of Engineering. Nubank's one of the largest digital banking platforms in the world with 70 million customers, I think, and growing. You have a CEO who's been very vocal about innovation. Can you talk about the role that leadership plays in setting the tone around culture and what you've had to do in your organization to foster levels of innovation?
Sure. So, I think one of the great things about the Nubank story is that the founders understood really early something that was pivotal that I think has shaped Nubank, which is that they understood that technology wasn't an accelerator to the business. It is the business. And that was true from day one, and I'm incredibly lucky to work for a company now 10 years later that embodies that mentality, right? So we aren't fighting against, some sort of oh, the technology folks don't get to talk to the business folks and we don't get to no, we have really strong culture of cross-functional teams where everybody's voice is part of the decision-making about how to respond to, what we're seeing in the market. And that's incredibly valuable, and because it comes from the founders all the way through as a through line to today, it's inarguable. Nobody can question that. It's part of what's built into the culture at Nubank, which is really awesome. And I think the second part of that is that leadership at Nubank is not dictatorial. Leadership is not somebody is making decisions off in the corner office and everybody has to go march, right? Leadership at Nubank is about clearing the paths that people can then walk, right? What's blocking you from being able to go off and do the incredible things that you were going to do as a team? And that idea of servant leadership is a strong part of at least what I experience in the leadership culture at Nubank as well. So, and then finally, I think there's a great sense that Nubank was founded to fight complexity for our customers, right? One of my favorite quotes that David, our CEO, says all the time is, we don't just want our customers to love us, we want them to love us fanatically. And
Love that.
when you start from that mentality, from the CEO and founder team, all the way through to everybody who comes to Nubank is inundated with that message over and over and over again, then that means that when people see an opportunity, they put the customer need front and center, and that drives the decision making. That's incredibly important, even when you're talking about, so my role is in the common technology platforms. That's where I sit. And so our customers are the rest of Nubank. But we still live that life. Our customers are the other engineers, the other business people at Nubank, and we want them to love us fanatically. And so it just permeates everything that the teams are working on.
Oh, I think that's great. I've also, I think I saw once before too that you have an office there at Nubank called Day One. So we can relate to that very much.
Every day is day one.
Sean, I'd like to hear from you. Same question, actually. PagerDuty has been an incredible organization actually helping to drive culture evolution. And you have a very strong CEO leader too. Can you just share your perspective on the role that leadership plays in culture and then how you've been able to innovate?
Yeah, so one of our kind of guiding principles is lead by example. Because this is hard, digital migrations and cloud migrations, and there's a lot of it happening. And it's spent, prior to PagerDuty, spent about 15 years at Amazon, and lots of cloud, lots of technology. And when you get out and see the rest of the world, it's not everyone's at the same level. And there's migrations are constantly happening, acquisitions, all this is happening. And so I think back to kind of how we think about that is leading by example. So everything we do, since we are a digital native, cloud first company, we're trying to teach everything we do as a company. So we've open sourced all our processes, like our internal on-call processes. You can download them as ops guides, but it's all there. And so that just means that there's a higher bar on how we operate to be exemplary. And I like to think of the kind of my role as a leader, it's almost like the role of a platform that we were just talking about backstage, where you build the platform for everyone to get greater benefit. And so you can almost think of your culture as your culture platform, right? And so the better your platform is, and the easier it is for the whole company to operate. So to be passionate about your customers, that's just part of your platform, right? And how people think about it internally. And as an engineer, that's how I frame it. As I've kind of grown up through the ranks, is my roles changed from kind of executing and being super hands-on to guiding projects to now really making sure that the culture's right. Because if you get the culture right, back to the earlier point, you can do just about anything.
Right. Quick note, you used to build robots.
I did.
Maybe you still build robots. Technology for technology's sake, how do you go about deciding when to invest in certain technological advances that influence culture? Do you have a thought around that?
Yeah, I've never been a fan of tech for tech's sake.
Yeah.
It's got to be a problem. Like, what's the real problem you're trying to solve? So, it could be the greatest technology in the world, but if it doesn't solve a real world problem, then kind of who cares? So I think, first is, again, starting with the customer. If you're solving real customer problems, then the technology decisions become easier.
Right.
There's always hard technology decisions about when to invest and what do you prioritize, features or tech debt or whatever it may be. But I think that, again, just pushing and focusing on the problems and not the technology is how to go about it.
Right. We undertook a pretty substantial culture evolution coming out of the pandemic. We have a leadership value system we call Leadership Principle 16 here at the company. I'm curious, Candace, you've had a long track record, Sony, Nike, Expedia. Can you tell us a little bit about, as you've made decisions on switching, companies and teams and roles, what do you typically look for? What's important to you from a culture perspective as you're thinking through that with your teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd probably have maybe two buckets. I think the first sort of like non-negotiable bucket for me is this idea of inclusion, and I'm like use that as an umbrella term for, that sense of belonging that is really difficult to measure, but we know it exists when you're in an organization. And then access and representation. I think those are things that as I enter into a company, I'm kind of, or I'm evaluating a company, I'm kind of on the lookout for almost immediately, like, do I feel like I belong? Do I feel like I have a voice here at the table and it's genuine and it's real? And then are there opportunities for access to training, career pathing, different opportunities? And on the representation front, as I'm evaluating the opportunity, I'm looking at C-suite, and I'm looking at the board of directors to see, is there anyone that looks like me there? Because I think if you don't see that, then it's hard to kind of see that clear path to where you could potentially go next. So I think full stop, inclusion has to be there. And then I think the other buckets around, what I'd want to cultivate, hopefully these things exist already. I already talked a little bit about resilience, but kind of in the broader context, you want a company to have a resilience mindset, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think we all learned a lot during that time, and I think we're in this period of kind of pretty constant instability, constant disruption. And so I think companies who are practicing how to be good at responding to those things are going to be fit for the future and fit for handling a lot of that uncertainty. So I think the resilience mindset is really important. And then the last thing is really the growth mindset. I think a learning culture, and I'm excited to kind of dive into that in my new role, because I think the developer community is, case in point, so excited about learning all the time, right? They always want to sink their teeth into new technology. They always want to feel like they're honing their craft.
Right.
So I think really having that culture, that growth mindset culture, that culture for learning is incredibly important.
One of the questions and feedback that we constantly get from many customers that are undergoing digital transformation, there's not enough, tech talent to help drive the change, and some companies want to be known for being an innovative, tech leader versus being in their industry. I want to come back to you, Justin, because Nubank started pretty much on a digital journey. How do you think about talent at Nubank? How do you attract talent? what are the kind of guiding principles that you all think about when you're trying to build and develop the best, builders, at your company?
So, keep in mind that we're a global footprint company now, and even though we operate in Brazil and Colombia and Mexico as our primary markets, our footprint for our company spans all over the world, and so we're close to 8,000 people at the company, more than 2,000 engineers, right? So it's a very heavy technology footprint inside of the company that size. And so we focus on attracting talent regardless of CV, regardless of pedigree, regardless of background. We want to find talent where it lives, and we want to bring it to the company based on our culture, our principles, and we're very proud of, right, you've heard Nubank's, we want our customers to love us fanatically. It's always day one. And we want to remove complexity and pain from people's lives. Like when you lead with that, talent is attracted to the mission, and then you need to surround it with a culture that encourages a growth mindset, that encourages the ability to grow through a career, rotate around inside the company. We also really try to encourage people to not just stick with one part of the company, like learn different domains, move around a little bit, be exposed to the different challenges, because you're going to grow as a person by being exposed to those different challenges rather than always just sticking with the same part of your path. And then I want to come back and talk a little bit, as Candace was talking about, the diversity and inclusion mission for our company. We believe in strong and diverse teams. We believe that diverse teams are the strongest teams. They can lead us to the best innovations. They can keep us from having blind spots when we're thinking about customer problems and potential solutions to that. And so I did want to call out two very specific recruitment strategies that we use that are awesome. We run every year. One is called Yes, She Codes.
Yes, She Codes.
Yes, She Codes,
Okay.
which is about attracting women identifying software engineers. And the other is called Nos Quedamos, which is about attracting black and brown engineers. And we run those programs every year, and our engineering teams, volunteer their time to run cohorts of, mob programming sessions and interviews and trainings, attracting talent, and we have huge signups for those every year, and it's a big part of our recruitment strategy. So again, that growth mindset, building those strong and diverse teams, but having a real mission-forward company just is the best possible way to start. And then lastly, the other thing I think is that we invest heavily in innovation when it matters, and we're not afraid to invest in innovation that seems off the beaten path if we think it's going to be leverage for us to do things better, faster, differently, more scalably. And that can be exciting for engineers who are looking for a challenge where they're not just going to sort of get the same old as they might get, going to any other off-the-shelf company. So
Before I move to Sean, one thing I'd just like to poke on is the pace of innovation sometimes correlates pretty heavily to how you can drive experimentation. And sometimes with experimentation, you can make mistakes and fail. How does Nubank think about experimentation? And can you, 2,000 engineers, that's great. Can you sort of fail?
So I've been at Nubank a little bit over 2 years. And prior to that, I'd worked with a lot of companies. I'm an old gray hair, right? I've been around a little bit. The thing that stood out to me as I walked in the door, above all else, was the incredibly strong, blameless culture that we have. We are encouraged to explore new pathways, to try new things, and to potentially fail. And when we fail, to raise our hand and say, something has happened, rally around, let's get this fixed, right? Because if you don't have that blameless culture, people will hide in the corner, and it's harder to figure out what went wrong, and you don't get that learning culture that way. And one of the great moments of my early career at Nubank was going to a post-mortem review and having the first person get up and walk through an experiment that failed and how it went badly. And at the end, everybody applauded and then went, fascinating. I'm not going to even try to do the Portuguese version. Fascinante, I think. But I was totally stunned. It's like, what is going on? And then everybody who stopped, same fascinante, which, how do you beat that, right? That's experimentation culture at its heart.
Yeah, I think that's great. We're going to probably, maybe we'll do a lesson for these after this session. Sean, I'd like to move to you because PagerDuty has had just an enormous impact, and certainly in automation and incident response management, which touches the customer experience. And you talked about the customer focus being so critical. What role do process changes like automation play in shaping culture as organizations are trying to move to the cloud, from your perspective?
Sure. So the reason we use automation is to really eliminate toil. There's a lot of low-value work that's just kind of slow, that's tedious, and it's just not needed, right? Machines are very good at this. So we talk a lot about moving from ticket speed, which is a lot of queues, a lot of waiting, to human speed, which is, imagine if the tickets are flowing, everyone's waiting for that ticket to come in, to machine speed. And so it's not a, I'm gonna automate everything and it's magically I'm gonna sit back and watch it. There's steps along the way and there's humans still involved and human in the middle. But especially if you look at the macro environment and everyone's trying to do more with less. And there's a lot of toil in organizations. I was talking to someone the other day about an interview process and what happens when a candidate doesn't show up. Think how much time is spent and wasted of getting the candidate back on to figure out when they can be available, when the interviewer can be available, and if it's a multi-person loop, there's like 7 people, there's the RC, there's hours of work just from one little missed interview. And so you see this toil across the organization, not just in the dev and IT world, but every facet of the organization has this. How do deals go through? How do orders go through? How do quotes go through? And so really we're trying to move the whole world to machine speed and get rid of all that waste because nobody needs the waste and it just slows your business down. And if your people, your workers are doing a lot of that kind of low value toil and that's all they're doing, then they're gonna leave. They're gonna go somewhere else where they can get a lot more value out of their job.
Do you view the engineering construct the way that Justin talked about? How important is that for culture? I've seen a number of companies make changes. They shift their mindset, deeply rooted in more of an engineering kind of mindset. How does PagerDuty think about it?
Yeah, well, our customer, we started with the engineers, right? We were 3 engineers founded at PagerDuty. And our customers have largely been devs and IT. And so it's deeply ingrained in everything we do, all the way up to our CEO of, she's on call, we're on call.
Your CEO's on call?
Yeah, so we've created alerts that if one of our top customers actually sends a support ticket, we all get notified just so we can see what's going on and we can dig in and really audit as well. And so, but if you're gonna walk the walk and talk the talk, you gotta eat the dog food or drink the champagne, whatever your analogy is, and it's critical, regardless of your product, if it's a dev product or a non-dev product.
Yeah, you want to add to that?
I just wanted to say that one of the things that I'm most sad about is that I haven't been able to participate in the on-call rotation or actually talking to our customers or to call into our support desk because I don't speak Portuguese enough. Then all of our customers, or the ones in Brazil anyway, do. Yeah. But I so desperately want to sit because we have a program for everybody to be able to take a rotation through the what we call the CX department. So I have to learn Portuguese just so I can be on call.
I think that's important. We have a process here at AWS where we do have to shadow our customers, and every now and then there are these question mark emails that come down. I won't tell you from which senior leaders at the company. I want to shift back to something that you talked about, Candace, because I think it's really important, particularly now. We launched a leadership principle about a year ago, and the focus is around striving to be Earth's best employer. And we stand behind people and that being a very big part of driving the right culture and outcomes. I found this quote that you once said, and I'm going to share it with everyone. And the quote is, "Companies are at their best when every member of our team feels respected, included, and heard. When everyone can show up as themselves, they do their best work every day." Why is that so critical for you? Can you give us some background on the quote in your context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a pretty personal story for me, so I think I'll use myself as kind of the use case for this. But I come from a family of immigrants. We came to this country when I was about 3 years old. And I was always kind of very familiar and working alongside technology. My parents made it a point to, have a computer in the home very early, to have a dial-up modem in the home very early. But I don't know that any of us really connected that it could become a profession for me. And that's one of the things I love about your story, Francesca, is I think that your mom made that connection for you. Yeah. But so the fact that I ended up here, I think still kind of astounds me. I'm still really surprised about it. But as I navigated, through my time within technology, and I was sitting at these tables, and then, I'm diverse in every aspect of the word. I'm mixed race, I'm a woman, I'm a mom, I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And so I was sitting at these tables and kind of thinking, I don't belong here, I don't fit in here. And so I think as I've, moved through a lot of that and kind of I'm lucky enough, I had a lot of mentors and sponsors that saw something in me and really saw, my potential and kind of, helped me build that self-esteem and understood why I had that seat at the table. I think I've really kind of shifted my mindset around the purpose of me being here and how I could, as I grow as a leader, how I could create those pathways for, future me's, right, who are coming in the door, who are having those same questions. And I think, the challenge for leaders out there today is really thinking about what does inclusion mean, right? Because again, it's not something that you can measure, but it's something you can feel when it's happening. And I think, you talk about diversity, companies are maturing in their diversity practices and really trying to figure out ways to bring more diverse talent in, but the challenge is really how do you keep that diverse talent engaged? And I think that was maybe something, as I look back at my career, had I had more access to things where people were checking in, people were seeing, oh, hey, how are you feeling about being a part of this team? I think it would have made that journey a little bit easier. So now for me, my driving purpose is always thinking about the future marginalized, those historically marginalized groups as they come in, as they really are being, recruited into our companies, how can we make it a very safe environment for them to feel like they belong?
Oh, I think it's such a great perspective. I'd like to hear from everyone else, by the way. I think, talent retention, how do you engage with employees more? That is becoming a key part of builders making decisions, right, on where to go. Can you just share any best practices that you might have, Justin and Sean?
Yeah, I found going back to the office really helps. Big news flash there. No, it's been, I started at PagerDuty during the pandemic, and it's, I jokingly tell people, instead of clicking on this link, I went to this link, and we had magically a different set of meetings, different set of people.
Yeah.
And so, it comes back to that culture. So during the pandemic it was super hard, and as we've gotten back together again, it is so much easier. Just the hallway conversations, hey, what are you working on? Just the drive-bys of just talking to people, going to lunch with them, going to breakfast with them. It does make such a big difference just to keep them engaged. But it's work, right? All these, even skip level meetings, all these things you have to spend a lot of time at and focus on, because it's not going to happen by itself. So I look at my calendar. I have my one-on-ones. I have my skip levels. I make sure I have meetings with teams even when we're all virtual, and then getting together. So my peers and my boss, the CEO, we get together once a month in person. I've done that now with my leadership team, both across product and engineering. We get together quarterly as a group. We meet once a month as a group on virtual sessions as well. But we're doing a lot more together, but it's all very focused and very purposeful and very planned, because you're trying to get anywhere from 20 or 30 leaders together in a city, because we're very decentralized as a company. We have people all over North America. We have people in Europe as well, and so to get 30, 40 people together at a certain time every quarter takes some planning, but it's all just effort and focus.
Yeah.
But the payoff is big, right? Everyone's engaged, and you have lower attrition, lower turnover, so that really improves your cost basis, because if you have less turnover, you have less ramping of people, less hiring of people, and people are more motivated. They're going to do a better job as well.
Right. Yeah, we've really had to rethink how we organize and message around flexibility of work. Justin, what about you? Any best practices you can share with the audience?
I mean, I think for Nubank, we're also going through the new way of working, as we call it, the new way of working, and getting people who have never been able to meet. Because remember, when the pandemic began, we were maybe 2,000 people. So from March of 2020 to now, we've more than tripled in size. So most of the company, and the grand majority of the company, has never worked in an office together with any other member of the organization. And so it's one of those moments where you get to sort of implant a new culture, because so many people don't remember what it was like to be sitting in the office when suddenly overnight everybody had to leave, and it was a much smaller environment. And so one of the things that we're actively focusing on right now, in fact, multiple conversations this week, is about how do we balance, A, getting people together physically when, of course, now we're globally distributed and you can't get everybody to Sao Paulo all the time. But second, how do you remove some of the distraction culture that has come about during this time when we've all gone offline and onto Zoom and onto Slack and onto, pick the set
Chime.
of tools that are, Chime, that, right? Like, how do you get back into a rhythm where you can focus? You're not constantly bombarded by interruptions, by challenges, by distractions. And what we find, as we're having these conversations, is that it's such an engagement motivator to just say, hey, we care about how much you're being distracted during your day. Everybody's like, oh, please, can we, fewer meetings, more blocks of time where we can focus. It's so important, and we often just forget about it, and people get sort of pounded down by the constant stream of information flowing at them that we just, ignore that part of it. So
My favorite's the email, then the Slack, then the text. Hey, did you get my Slack?
Yeah.
In my email. It's like, yeah, got all three, thank you. I'm gonna do 3 times as much work. So it is a constant, because it's so easy, right?
Yeah.
It's cheap for me to send a Slack or a text or an email and just flood the world. So.
But I do think it's one of those oxymorons where you think we're constantly talking, which means you're engaged.
Right.
And quite the opposite is actually true. Like, you're actually disengaging people by not letting them actually focus on the thing that they really want to focus on.
I think it's a great point. In the abstract, we have a line that says, culture doesn't just happen. And one of the ways that I've heard from all of you in our interactions is how you've been able, and I'm going a little bit off script, how you've been able to set goals and metrics to help advance strategic initiatives in the company. Can you share with the audience just best practices on how you do that, and how has that accelerated your own sort of digital cloud, your outcome, name your outcome? How have you been able to do that? Anyone can start.
I'll start. So, when I started at PagerDuty, everybody wants to please everybody and say yes to everything. And so we started, the goals would come out, people have their draft goals, and there's way too many goals on everything's important. If everything's important, nothing's important, right? If I have 1 bucket of water, I can't put out 100 fires. I can put out 1 fire, 2 fires, but not 100. And so really getting intentional about, what are the goals that we can achieve to hit maybe a 70% success rate. So if I have 10 goals, I'm gonna try to hit 7 of those. And there could be stretch goals. I think the challenge is back to the interrupts, that stuff is coming in every day, that could reprioritize what we have. And, we had the pandemic, now we have the macro environment, and we have cost pressures, and so the business is changing quarterly. And so we're now looking at, okay, do we readjust our goals quarterly, or is there a better process for that? But, so I think getting super intentional about what we're committing to, not trying to commit to everything, not trying to boil the ocean, so to speak. And then the second part is measurement. What are your key metrics? There's KPIs, there's metrics, there's all sorts of different frameworks, but is your team really eating, thinking, drinking those metrics, going to bed thinking about those metrics, waking up thinking about those metrics? And when I say your team, like everybody on the team. And if it's a latency or if it's some SLO or whatever it may be, everybody needs to be thinking about how to improve that, how to drive that, and it should be fingertippy. It's a question I ask a lot in interviews is, what are your metrics that drive your business? And you start probing a little bit, and it's very quick to see if they're really metrics driven or not. It was a big deal at Amazon, I know too, that if you didn't know your metrics, you were in trouble in a meeting as you went up the chain.
We just call that dive deep.
Yes. But what's interesting about that is when you start doing that, you could ask anybody on the team, what your key metrics are, and they'll be able to just rattle them off. And what's great about that is then they're thinking about, you know what, if I did this, I bet you I could shave, you know, a few points or improve a few points. And next thing you know, you can't turn it off. Everybody is almost obsessed with improving the metrics. I had, you know, one team that was working on latency, and we finally got latency where we wanted to be, and we were like, this is good. You know, we had a P90 of 2 seconds, and everyone's happy. And they wouldn't stop working on latency. It's like, no, we're done. We can go free up now and go work on another problem. And it's like they just keep thinking about latency and the metrics and how to drive and how to change the architecture and more caching strategies. And it's like, no, let's go deliver some value over here. So it's a really an amazing event when you get the team to that level, because just the amount of innovation that's going to flow once you get it all right is it's awesome.
Any other responses? How do you use goals and metrics to shape your culture?
I mean, I think, Sean, you said it really well. I mean, I think as leaders, it's really important that as we get those top-level organizational goals, and I've been really, you know, pleased to see that Expedia Group is doing a good job at really sharing and really kind of like repeating and reiterating what those goals are. You know, we have in the form of, you know, these big, bolder initiatives that we're really trying to get after in the next year. I think as leaders, we need to take that information, distill it down to our team in the form of our own set of goals, so that there's a clear tie between what are our objectives and how do they actually translate back to the business value, so that the folks on the team have a good understanding of, oh, here's how I'm adding value. Here is how I'm delivering the company's strategy. And then I think as leaders, it's really important that we make sure that there's a clear understanding of that, drive clarity within those things, both at the team level and at the individual level as well. Because I think oftentimes we say something and we expect everybody to just go off and do it, but nobody checks in and nobody's sure if, hey, is that exactly, you know, do I understand what it is that I'm supposed to be delivering right now? So I think it's really important to have those checks and balances and give recognition to the people who are delivering on those goals, and have honest conversations with the people who maybe are not, and maybe haven't understood exactly, you know, how, again, the role they're playing in delivering that value. So I just think it's critical to be super transparent about those things.
Yeah,
The
love that.
context is critical. Without the context, you know, people start operating, they're scratching their heads, why is this important, or why are we, but once they have it, it's just, it does permeate.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to highlight the often hidden work that people do that support. You know, like oftentimes the metrics and measures that matter in the business seem distant from some of the more engineering specific metrics, and making sure that connective tissue is there and that they can see themselves represented is so valuable, but it also gives the rest of the company a way to recognize that work. And the other thing that I'm always thinking about in terms of engineering metrics is a lot of times engineering metrics tend to be stability indexes and things that you can only fail to achieve, as opposed to flags you can set in front of you to drive, you know, actual new value. And so if you're living in a team that can only fail, the best you can do is not fail, then that's demoralizing. And so, you know, you have to be wary of the parts of the business where those metrics are the ways that people's, you know, value is being measured.
You mentioned recognition. How important is recognition?
Incredibly important. I mean, again, I spend most of my career working in sort of what you would call the horizontal spaces, the parts, the platforms and the tools and the infrastructure that are then used by the other teams to go off and do the work that impacts our customers directly. And again, the market recognizes what we have 70 million customers. That's fantastic. We launched a new, you know, credit card in Mexico. That's fantastic. And it's sometimes hard from an outside perspective to see all the way down to, you know, the people who are working on the CI/CD platform, or, you know, the database platforms or whatever. And you need to, as a leader, shine that spotlight and make sure it traces from that thing launched and all of these people contributed to the effort that got it out the door. Because otherwise, again, you lose engagement in the places where the light doesn't shine.
Yeah. One of the best practices that we've had to employ here at AWS is actually, we run an annual just tech survey. We go out and we solicit a ton of feedback from our community, and we get different domains. And one of them I've actually been quite surprised by is, in the maybe new way of working, how much recognition ties into that employee experience, which then, you know, ties into strong, healthy, cultures of engagement that you show up. So any other best practices or any other mechanisms that you have around just how you recognize, show appreciation,
Yeah, celebrating the wins is key, and the wins are everywhere, right? And so it's hard. I'm just like drive, but you got to take that step back, and it could be an efficiency gain. We even have deprecating products that or features, functionality that aren't, maybe they're not getting high usage, but getting rid of those is also a reason to celebrate, because that's less code you have to maintain, less code that could have a vulnerability, less code that bring you down, right? If that could go south on you. So while it's kind of a weird thing to celebrate deprecating something, it matters, right? Everything matters. Cost saving, I mentioned that earlier, but we just had a big win where we shaved off $200,000 of our AWS budget. Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
We're all doing it. It's all right.
But it's a big deal, right? It's a big deal to be that much more efficient from one month to the next is a big deal. And then to your point around the platform teams, or the CI/CD teams, or the infrastructure teams, it's those are, I think, some of those teams that need the most rewarding. Because again, back to our product, we're kind of like the dial tone that we have to be up, and so we celebrate our availability. And if we're not hitting our 4 nines numbers, and we're having conversations about it. What do we got to do? What do we got to change? How do we think about this? And so, and our customers appreciate it. And that's another a big point, is sharing the feedback from customers.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of customers here. I think I've talked to most of the people in this room in the last few days. It feels like it with all the meetings, but there's a lot to celebrate. And a lot I'm going to take back too to share, because the whole team's not here. They're not hearing the user stories. They're not hearing the good things that our product's being used to tackle. New businesses, new areas, stuff that we never even thought about. They're applying it to really, really awesome problems. And so taking that back and sharing it, also sharing regularly, like every meeting, leaving time to celebrate. All hands, we have a kind of a celebration section as well.
I recently heard from one of our customers about the importance of creating, they use the term learning agility as a construct for culture. And this is one way, send different employees out to various ways so that they can grow. Justin, I've heard that you all have done a lot around what you call new cloud. Can you just share with the team what's new cloud? How has it helped shape your culture and allowed you to innovate faster?
Sure. So New Cloud is a program that's a partnership between AWS Training and Certification and our internal technical learning initiative team that we've put together a curriculum where the whole drive is to get 1,600 people to go through a series of, it's an optional set of curriculum, right? They can derive their own learning experience through 109, I think, different optional classes. And in the the second half of this year alone, we've already driven 280 people through the experience. We've run 7 events. And the whole goal there, and this is thinking about the fact that, Nubank is a cloud-native, cloud-first, fully digital banking experience. We need there to be expertise and intuition about what the cloud is for and what it enables spread everywhere in the organization. It's not just the engineers. It's the product managers. It's the designers. It's the business leaders. It's the financial analysts. It's everybody needs to understand how to take advantage of this platform that the whole bank runs on in order to be more nimble in doing whatever it is they do. They have to understand, why have we chosen to do what we do on AWS, on the cloud, and again, build that intuition so that they are understanding what they might not be blocked by. They might think they're blocked by something, but they're not. And I think that's incredibly valuable. But that also, by the way, there's a very selfish part of that, which is the more that the rest of the business understands why we have invested in building a cloud-first, cloud-native business, then the less we have to argue with people about, every decision we've made that has cost impacts. Now we're all worried about costs and all those things, and efficiency and scalability. These are all watchwords of what our engineering culture is built. But we need everybody to understand why the cloud so that we can leverage it on our behalf.
Right. One of the other topics that I often hear is around establishing a sustainable culture for business growth, but doing it at scale. Everything happening at scale. You know, I am just curious your perspective. Maybe Candace, I can start with you. I know you're newly with Expedia, but you've got a ton of expertise. How are you thinking about what do organizations need to do to anticipate, you know, how to transform themselves to operate at scale?
Yeah, I think from a technology perspective, I think many companies, maybe not yours, Justin, because you're cloud native, are kind of in this interesting space where we're still sort of straddling two worlds, right? We have the legacy environments that we've all built, you know, traditionally on, and then we've got the new environments where, you know, we've hopefully built them for scale, built them with resilience in mind, and we have this process in which we have to move the legacy environment over to the new environment, and that takes time and it takes a lot of intention. And I think, you know, as we head into what will be probably a little bit of a rocky season, you know, externally with everything that's happening, I think we have to continue to think of ways to balance those two worlds while still delivering on our strategic goals, still delivering the business value that we need to deliver. So I think that's one challenge that you know, my hope is that leaders are continuing to think about how they build a strong foundation that they can build those new, cool, new, shiny products on that won't fall apart, that will be built with resilience. And then I think the other thing is really a simplification across the environment. I think that just has to continue to happen. You know, I know many of us who have been in tech for a long time have seen like the influx of all of the tools and all of the different technologies and all of the innovations. And while that's, you know, really great, I think it's also led to a little bit of inefficiencies, a little bit of sprawl across the environment that makes it just all the more complex. So I think continuing to look for opportunities where you can simplify that tool set, simplify ways of working, is going to be critical for building to scale.
Love that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mentioned the kind of deprecating features that aren't being used. It's critical, because otherwise you'll get all these features, and maybe there's a few that are being used, but you have this whole surface area that you have to support. I also think from a scale perspective, the platform's critical important, because it really does help allow you to have a higher velocity of features and of development going through. So what is your platform? You know, which parts have high velocity and lots of change that you need to make it really simple, really easy for developers to push things through the platform? And the other big one, I think, is, you know, what is your critical IP? You know, what do you want to be known for, that you're going to spend a lot of time on, that you're going to iterate on? And what can you kind of license? What other software can you buy to make part of your platform? So if you have, you know, something that's, you know, maybe it's a texting engine or SMS engine, or maybe it's just an HTML form or widget, like just license it, right? Because that's not probably going to be your secret sauce. And by licensing it and relying on somebody else who that's all they think about day in, day out is that feature, that capability, you know, you're going to get a best of breed tool. And that frees your team up to really focus on kind of what's unique and what the unique value you're driving to your customers. And that's it's a big mind shift of, you know, you hear about the make versus buy, and it's a hard debate. And you talk to everybody, it's like, oh, we decided to make it ourselves and should have bought. It's not unique. We built a marketplace, or whatever the example may be. You know, there's always that regret of, you know, should have just licensed some piece of software here to free up the org to go faster over here. But and software's getting cheap too. There's a lot of software you can license from a platform capability and open source as well that you can pull in and get a lot of value for a very low cost.
And I think that mapping exercise that the business does to understand which things in the domain are really core and critical, so that you can make good decisions and have a framework that the whole business understands. So as the new bank example, we built our core banking platform in-house very early, as opposed to licensing a set of pipes and tools and, you know, all the other ways that you can white label a credit card or a financial platform. But that's given us an opportunity to go after markets and market opportunities that we wouldn't be able to if we were relying on a third party and we were just part of their backlog. And so not every company is going to make that same decision, because every company is facing a different set of market challenges. But if you start early by saying, this is core, we need to control what's core, then great, you can make good decisions about what you do and how you invest the limited focus and talent that you have on the things that will matter most for the business.
Love that. Well, we're rounding out to the end of the session. I want to do maybe a quick lightning round sort of wrap. We started this conversation talking about the different elements of how you shape culture. Maybe just around the horn, what's one thing you would advise all of the audience out there in terms of lessons learned in shaping culture that has worked for you?
So I would say spend the time up front. No matter what you're doing, spend the time up front. And Amazon calls it working backwards. But it's really, you think about if you're going to build a house, you don't just start going out there with a bunch of 2x4s and nails and start building a house. You make sure you have a design and an architect. And that's true for almost everything. Even a new business or a new product or a new venture you're going to do is spend the time up front. And there's almost, there's analysis paralysis. You can go too far spending time, but I think all too often people jump into products, even features that you think this is a pretty easy feature, we're just going to go, build it, whatever it is. It's like, well, let's talk about that. Is it, if we build that and a few customers start using it, but not everybody, can we turn it off? Like, what if those customers really depend on this feature and then you turn it off? Well, that's pretty bad. That'd be a horrible customer experience. So just thinking through all those use cases up front, I think is critically important and will save you so much time and effort down the road. But it does take everybody kind of thinking about the idea, really coming at it from different angles to making sure you've got, that's where the diversity matters again. You have all these different perspectives from around the company looking at something and giving you feedback on good, bad, and stuff you probably didn't even think about. But you will go so much faster just doing that more upfront work at the beginning.
I love it. Candace.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything we've talked about is really important in building the culture and building a strong culture. And I think the other thing we learned during the pandemic was really, considering the people, putting the people first. And I hope that continues to carry forward as, we're moving out of that. Because I think, all of those things can happen, but it can't happen without, strong people who feel confident and know what they're doing and have, clear action and understanding of what role they play in delivering everything.
Great advice. Justin?
I would say that it's important to celebrate what makes your company unique, not what makes your company like every other company. And so, I think of the Nubank story and how important it is for our culture to celebrate the fact that we're a Brazil first organization, that we're an organization that is primarily located in Latin America, because the team, lives in a very digitally connected world, and most of the representation of the software engineering world is Silicon Valley, it's the US, right? And what makes Nubank unique, other than its products, is the fact that we have this incredibly powerful, enormously excited, enthusiastic team that lives in a place and works in a place that doesn't get a lot of the attention, and we need to celebrate those kinds of victories and those kinds of things that separate you, and because that's what's going to bring your team along for the ride. If you just talk about why you're like every other bank or software provider or whatever, where's the enthusiasm there? So, make sure you identify what makes you unique.
Well, I think you all have established extremely rich cultures with great mission and purpose, and you've been able to attract a lot of bright people, and I hope we have an opportunity to continue to collaborate. Everyone, please give them a round of applause. And thank you so much. Have a great reInvent.